Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome all. We're really pleased that you're able to join us today. Welcome to Social Work Week and to this event where we will explore how students, standards and sector trends are shaping education and training. Any views, information or opinions expressed by third parties during Social Work Week are the speaker's own and don't reflect the views of Social Work England. Social Work England haven't endorsed third-party content and are not liable for the content of sector-led sessions. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague and to the rest of our panel for the session. Thanks all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie, and welcome everybody to this last day of Social Work Week and what we hope is going to be a stellar event full of scintillating conversation and discussion about preparing for practice and about the sort of education and training landscape, the trends, the standards, the student influences, the student ideas, and the things that are really shaping the future of education and training for social work in England over the coming years. And I'm really delighted to be part of this panel and part of this event with what is a sort of stellar lineup of speakers where we're going to be grappling with some of these questions and thinking about that on this Friday afternoon. So I'm conscious that it's lunchtime as well. I hope you've all got a sandwich and a cup of tea and you're sitting comfortably and ready for a really hopefully interesting discussion over the next hour or so. As I said, we've got a great sort of lineup of speakers, which I think we can put up on the screen now. The format of this event is going to be that all of our sort of speakers are going to talk for, just a couple of minutes each, and then we're going to go into a more of a Q&A session. As Katie just explained, there is the Q&A function for this. Please do engage with the Q&A function, which we can then, which I'll be able to see, and I'll be able to sort of pose some of your questions to our panel. So we'll have a bit of a quick sort of whistle stop through some slides from each of our panelists, and then Q&A afterwards amongst us all, and a bit, hopefully a really rich discussion about some of these kind of key trends, etc., that are sort of shaping education and training. So, I mean, just by way of introduction, hopefully some of these faces will be familiar to you all. They are really fantastic supporters of our work at Social Work England. So I'm really delighted to be joined by Dr. Kevin Stone, who is the chair of our Education and Training Advisory Forum and also an associate dean, more recently moved over to the University of South Wales, and also importantly a registered social worker and a real a repertoire of knowledge for us at Social Work England in terms of the education landscape. We've also got Professor Anne-Marie Glover, who's on our National Advisory Forum and a professor of social work at the University of Birmingham, also a registered social worker, and Joe Hill, also a member of our National Advisory Forum and a registered social worker and a recent graduate, so able to kind of provide some really interesting insights and perspectives. And just by way of introduction, myself, I'm not a registered social worker reluctantly, but I'm Assistant Director for Policy and Strategy at Social Work England, and really, really pleased to be here today. So let's just, a couple of introductory remarks from me, I think, just to set the scene. Really, really pleased at Social Work England to be holding this discussion about education and training in England, and also thinking about our role as Social Work England in this space, but also looking at the broader education and training landscape and what are some of the kind of challenges and issues, and what does that mean for social work education? What does that mean for us as the regulator? And what are some of the things that we need to kind of consider as part of that? And really keen to kind of hear from audiences as well about some of the themes that we'll be talking about today, about the things that are influencing some of the broader trends, and some of the things that we as the regulator or education providers or those that are kind of around this sector really need to kind of be aware of as we're thinking about, our work and how we can ensure that education and training for social work is fit for purpose and able to ensure that, graduates are able to go into sort of very fulfilling social work careers and able to thrive, and that they're sort of as set up as best possible to be able to thrive in what are, as we know, really challenging but also such rewarding and important careers, as I'm hope that we will agree. Very quickly, I think this next slide now, we're just going to sort of talk through some of the work that we do at Social Work England, just to sort of set the scene as we kind of think about that broader landscape. I believe that we as the regulator hold a very privileged position in the education and training broader ecosystem, in that we are able to sort of oversee and have unique perspectives of the whole education and training landscape. We oversee all social work courses across England, and we do this through a huge variety of ways. We're always we have sort of annual monitoring processes. We obviously do our inspection cycles for approvals and reapprovals. When there are changes to courses, we work really closely with providers to understand those changes, as well as where there are areas where there might be concerns or areas where course providers might need support, and we're very engaged in those processes as part of our regulatory functions. And we're really delighted to sort of come to the end of our first full cycle of approvals just this month. Hot off the press, we have now, over our first 4 years, reviewed or inspected over nearly 260 social work courses. So as I said, I think that's a really unique and privileged position that we have to be able to sort of see that overall picture for social work education, how it's changing, how it's evolving, what are some of the challenges there, what are some of the opportunities, and those are some of the themes we're keen to pick up today as part of our discussion, and how might that shape our work going forward as Social Work England. And I think that last point on this slide is absolutely key, that as a regulator, collaboration with education and training has been absolutely core to our approach. We're always keen to sort of hear how that feels on the ground, but we really want providers and colleagues to feel really confident in how they're approaching the application of our standards in education and training, how that feels on the ground, but also to work collaboratively to explore how course design and delivery is working in practice. What are some of the kind of innovative approaches to course design and delivery that are happening across the country, and we see some fantastic examples of this when we're out on inspection, but also thinking about how our regulatory approach shapes and influences social work courses, and what more we can do to support education and training providers as they're kind of grappling with some of the complexity that I'm sure we'll deal with today. But collaboration, of course, being absolutely fundamental to our approach. And I think that feeds into this next slide, which gives you just very quickly a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the things we've found in that kind of I think it's really, in terms of our unique perspective, where this is the sort of shape of social work education that we see out there. And this is just a really quick slide talking about the types of courses that we see out there, the regional breakdown, obviously the sort of rise of apprenticeships in recent years, the different pathways, and some of the opportunities and challenges that brings for social work. And one of the things that we're keen to do as the regulator is sort of really draw on our data and the annual monitoring and the learnings that we have from those first 4 years to reflect on the sort of shape of education training. So this gives you a quick flavour of what that looks like. Obviously a large number of social work courses, as colleagues who would be aware, in the postgrad landscape, growing number of apprenticeships, but a really nice mix of courses across the country. And I think that feeds into things like pipeline conversations and recruitment to the profession, etc., which we hope that by sharing this sort of data and analysis, we'll also be able to help colleagues and partners to sort of think about the broader landscape and how that feeds into challenges for the profession. And then just following on to the next slide, I think, is then just talking very, very quickly about what we're also looking to do in the education and training landscape at Social Work England, so that again, just stressing that really collaborative approach. I'll leave Kev, who's going to talk a bit about our upcoming review of education and training standards and how we're keen to embed our knowledge, skills and behaviours statements that again was very collaboratively produced, which we're very excited about. And we're also just thinking now at Social Work England about, again, from that first cycle, how can we improve our approach? How can we improve our inspection model? How can we really sort of learn from the best practices happening across the country, but also pick up, what does it sort of feel like on the ground, and how might we be able to factor that in a bit more perhaps into our approach for the next cycle. And also, a bit of a teaser here that we have got a bit of an upcoming publication that we're looking to produce later in the year, which I hope will draw on some of the themes we'll cover today about what is happening in the education landscape, what are some of these trends and perspectives that we want to reflect on and what it means for social work, and also how we've sort of drawn on some of the key things from our inspections to think about our future approach for education and training and social work. So, you know, it's a bit of a watch this space for a publication that we've got coming up later in the year. We will also soon be approving and reapproving AMPS and BIA courses, which again, I think is a really unique and privileged position for us to be in. Those are such critical courses, and we're really pleased to have the sort of new standards and guidance for those courses, and we will be kind of later in the year beginning the approval and reapproval cycle for those as Social Work England. And we've also got, I hope for this is music to the ears of many in our audience today, but a real focus on practice education is a key priority for Social Work England over the next year or so. We just know how critical that role is, the key role that it plays in the education and training landscape, but we're really wanting to kind of understand a bit more how that works in practice, what the training landscape looks like for practice education, and how best we might be able to support practice education as a key role in both practice and in the education landscape, and thinking about different kind of levers and options that might be. So again, a bit of a watch this space, but that is a kind of key priority, and one that we're hopefully, I think we'll pick up today a bit about the vital role of practice education and what more we as a regulator and what else education providers and practice educators themselves can do to really promote and celebrate and also recognise the vital role of practice education. And then finally, you know, again, I think we could talk all day about some of the trends in education and training, but also, you know, we are looking at Social Work England about the emerging use of AI in social work education and training, thinking about doing some research in that area. And again, I think that'll be something perhaps is touched on today in terms of one of the key things that is happening, not just in social work, but in almost every aspect of society. So what does it mean for social work, and what should we or could we be doing to sort of understand and help providers, students and others navigate what is a really quite complex and evolving area, and so on. So that is probably way too much from me, but it is just a quick overview of some of the things we're thinking about at Social Work England in terms of education and training. But I'm going to pass to Kev now, who can also talk to us a little bit more about our work in standards and the role of ETAF.
That's great. Thank you very much, Natalie. I really appreciate that. So it's a real privilege to be here today. One of the key things I think is that social work education has got a key stage in this Social Work Week, which is really good. Just a bit of an introduction. So I have the real privilege of chairing the Education and Training Advisory Forum. We're currently a group of 28 individuals who are part of the education training landscape for social work. We have a varied mix of people, but one of the, which I'm going to come to in a minute, but one of the real key things for me is that every member of the Education Training Advisory Forum, which I'm going to start calling ETAF from now on because it's just a bit easier, are passionate about social education and the advancement of social education as well, looking at the landscape, looking at the things that Natalie has just highlighted to us, and thinking about how we can support Social Work England in developing and advancing standards in that area. So we've got members who come with lived and learned experience of social work, representatives from education providers, academia, national organisations, thinking around the local authorities, local governments and the NHS, the voluntary sector as well, so a whole variety. We've got student representatives on the forum, and we've also got members of the National Advisory Forum who you're going to hear about shortly. But we meet every 2 months. We have a very set agenda in terms of how we're going to be supporting Social Work England in their work. And one of the things I just don't want to forget to say, that if you think there is a particular topic or area that you think the ETAF need to be looking at, then we have a dedicated email address, which I'm sure we'll put in the chat, and you can email the ETAF as well, so we can make sure that we are doing the best possible role we can as a critical friend to deliver the priorities of education training, but also making sure the currency of what we do is evident in all of that we set out to do in those meetings. If I could just have the next slide, please. So Natalie's kind of alluded to the fact that we are going to be looking at, as part of the round, at the education and training standards. This is a really key set of standards. This is the standards that all education providers need to meet to be able to deliver social education, regardless of the particular mode of education that is, whether it's fast track, postgraduate, undergraduate, combined. All need to make sure that they meet the education training standards. But we're going to be going through a process soon of evaluating and making suggestions around those standards. And there's a wider consultation piece, I know, that will be taking part at the end of the year. But as part of this work, we have developed a new set of readiness for professional practice standards. We're going to call them the KSBs, which basically are a baseline to ensure that regardless of which education program a student or an apprentice undertakes, that there is the same expectation about the levels of standard education and curriculum that they will have knowledge of prior to them being awarded with their degree. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. Some of the challenges that we've had with developing new standards is making sure we maintain the currency of language and terminology, because these standards are going to be in operation for a number of years, and therefore we've really taken the time to think about and curate and wordsmith the language that's in those, because we need to ensure that it's really clear and doesn't need a lot of additional guidance for those who are using, particularly students and apprentices who need to be able to ensure that they can understand those. As I said earlier, the curriculum and the standards and the educational framework for social work is advancing. Okay, the knowledge, skills and behaviour statements, which I'm going to go into in a few moments' time, have really been an attempt to ensure that we bring together all the best parts of the education standards that we have into one document, into one place, so that we can ensure that every single student comes out with the same level of education, and more importantly, that the public can expect a certain standard of education for all of those people that are coming into their homes and doing social work. But the consultation around the education training standards will begin in autumn of this year. So there will be opportunity, a much wider opportunity for everyone to get involved in looking at those education training standards so that we can make it the best possible set of standards that we can. Thank you. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are familiar with apprenticeship programs, you will already be aware of a knowledge, skills and behaviours framework. We've taken that in consideration when we have been developing the new set of standards for all social work programs, regardless about whether they are apprenticeships or not, but the expectation to meet those standards, and also what's expected then to move into the professional standards. So they're designed to be a springboard into the professional standards that we all have to, if you're a registered social worker, need to be able to meet to ensure that we're all practicing safely and to expectations. So some of the key areas that we've been focusing on are around anti-discriminatory practice. You know, more broadly, we might say inclusive practice for social work trainees, social workers and apprentices. But we've done this in a way by bringing together a wide variety of organisations and disciplines across the sector to achieve this. So there have been many voices who went into the development of the knowledge, skills and behaviour statements. And we really took our time to ensure that we got to the position where we felt that they were the best possible standards for social education as well, involving all stakeholders. And more importantly as well, with those with lived and learned experience. And so I'm very proud of the piece of work that we undertook in achieving those standards, and they are readily available now on the website. You can look at them straight away, and I know education providers will already be looking at them and thinking about how is this going to influence or impact on our educational programs. We do anticipate there are going to need to be some changes to programs, of course. That's the same with any enhancement framework. But what we're hoping to do, that actually a lot of them will be easily recognisable. They will already be mapped to modules already, because they are the mainstay of social work values, principles and standards that have existed for a long time. We've also made sure that we've taken an evidence-informed view of the standards as well, and ensured that that's embedded in the standards for social workers who are training. So we've done that through a process of reflection, and sometimes we really had to grapple with some of the standards. We had lots of information that were coming into us at the Education Training Forum to try and ensure that we got the balance right, and we will continue to do that as we move through into the new education training standards piece as well. So The last thing I just want to add on really is just to say, you know, clearly we've been reflecting on in the standards on recognizing the responses to need, harm and risk. You would anticipate that, I'm sure. There's nothing in there that you would not expect us to be doing. But for us, the Education Training Advisory Forum offers us a space for all those people who are interested in education training to come together in a way that brings together lots of the different threads to make sure that what we have is a really sound, really solid education training framework. So that's probably as much as I want to say at the moment. There'll be opportunity, I'm sure, with the Q&A coming on. But I've got the privilege of introducing you to Anne-Marie Glover, who's Professor at Birmingham University, who's now going to lead us in the next couple of slides. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Kev. I'm just going to say a little bit firstly about being a member of the National Advisory Forum, and you can see some of the examples here of the work that the forum has done. So as well as being a member of ETAF along with Kevin, I'm also for about 5 years now been a member of the NAF, which I think it was around early 2020 when I saw the advert, and I thought actually it's really important to engage with and support Social Work England as the new regulator. And you can see here this sort of critical friend role emphasis. And there's a group of us with what we call, or Social Work England called lived and learned experience. And kind of alongside a range of other people on the forum, I've had the opportunity to co-produce, contribute to reports, to review policy and guidance, support recruitment, and get involved in some of those wider strategy discussions. And actually, you know, meeting and working with other members has been really inspiring, hearing about the work that they do. And I actually think the work of the National Advisory Forum has made a real difference and impact to the work of Social Work England. If you were at the first session on Monday, you will have heard somebody else from the NAF, Sally, talk about opportunities for those with lived experience and students to apply to join the NAF, and there'll be opportunity for others later on this year. And I'd really encourage people to consider applying for this important role. So on the next slide, I'm just going to say a little bit about some of the key factors that I think are shaping social work education. And this is really from my perspective. And it felt important to start with the international definition from the IFSW about this sense of, you know, social work is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline. And what's really important about this is it speaks to both elements of our work as social work educators. So we address the academic discipline element, we equip students with, you know, the skills and knowledge for professional social work practice, working with people and structures, as is in the IFSW definition. So they become research and theoretically informed practitioners. They're critically reflective and they're driven by a desire to see social justice. And then also I wanted to go on to talk about the importance of placements and practice educators. And that's where the practice aspect of the profession comes into play. When our students go out on placement, they start to apply their academic learning in a particular context. And again, the wider IFSW statement speaks to the social work role in working with those people and cultures. So they are supporting and enhancing the lives of individuals and communities by challenging structural oppressions, developing relationships with services and carers and other professionals when they're on placement. That's where that work happens. And practice educators are so central to a high quality practice placement experience. And some of you will, here on this call may be very familiar with this work. You might be doing that yourself. You know, you are developing the next generation of social workers and you ensure they demonstrate some of the important ethical and value-based approaches of the profession and are equipped with the right skills and knowledge to practice, as well as assessing. You're providing critically reflective supervision for students and speaking with students and practice educators on our programmes, and I primarily now work on our Step Up to Social Work programme. I hear from them and see that vital role they play in supporting and teaching students, also acting as their mentors, role modelling high quality social work practice. And it's really important we, both HEIs and employers, value and equip and support them in this important role. On World Social Work Day this year, social workers across the nation celebrated our profession, and it was great to be part of that with other people at Social Work England. And as I read of this year's theme, celebrating intergenerational social work, And the IFSW's narrative around this, how respecting other generations, encouraging the sharing of wisdom, contributes to building really strong communities and speaks to the importance of equipping students to work in all areas of practice. I think the days of the silo of adults and children is important to focus on the future, which is the connection between adults, children, families and community practice. They all interconnect with each other. And then the next thing that feels really important to me, and I know is important to a lot of people here too, is partnership with people with lived experience and of course other key stakeholders. It's so important for social work education. And at the University of Birmingham, we work with around 40 people with lived experience who contribute to admissions, to the development and delivery of teaching and to assessment. And they're supported by our service user and carer coordinator. And it's a really important aspect of ours and all of your programmes, I'm sure. It requires a huge resource and time commitment, but it's hugely beneficial and really valuable for our students. When we were establishing our Step Up programme, for example, like all programmes, the core element was that the course was designed, developed and delivered in partnership with social work agencies in the region. And this really ensures not only do we have important contributors from local practitioners, but actually the programme reflects and responds to that current and local context of practice. And then talking about relational practice, social work draws on a wide range of theoretical frameworks, but has a long-standing history of relational approaches to practice. And equipping students to engage respectfully, thoughtfully, and meaningfully with other people is such an important foundation of our programmes. We've got an event happening in a couple of months' time where Professor Gillian Roosh from the University of Sussex is going to be coming and delivering our annual public lecture speaking around this theme, and that's such an important theme. And then finally, I think it's just really important to acknowledge there is a growing range of routes into social work education, and both undergrad and postgrad also step up, think ahead, frontline, and in more recent years a real growth in apprenticeship programs. And I think it's important we continue delivering social work education in our HEIs, and I'd love to see an increase in bursary provision and other sources of funding for social work education. We really want social work to reflect the diversity of the community that they support and serve, and include those with a huge range of experiences and perspectives. And I do think that those funded routes do offer an access to social work education for those that might not be able to afford this. And then I'm going to hand over to Joe to speak about the student and newly qualified social worker perspective. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. That was, I'm going to echo a lot of what Anne-Marie and Kev has said. I guess what is really kind of heartening as a recent student and now a graduate and a registered social worker is that from hearing the conversations that are going on within Social Work England, a lot of the concerns that I have, or the kind of the worries that I think other students have, they are being considered, and people are really thinking about them in depth. I guess from kind of my end, what I was thinking about, I sit on the National Advisory Forum and also the ETAF as well. And what I try and bring it back to is kind of what the experience of students is like. And I guess that for me, a large part of that is acknowledging kind of students tend to be quite time poor, and you're learning so much at once, and you're learning a lot about social work, but you're also learning about the world and about yourself. And I guess that for me, it's positive to see that there is a lot of conversation going on about how we kind of make the expectations really clear for students and for education providers and things. I guess also thinking about kind of what the motivation is for people that are studying social work, and generally that's that may be because they've got lived experience either directly of social work or of issues that social work support people with. And I guess that brings kind of an amazing strength and diversity of background and experiences. And also what I think is positive is recognizing that in some ways that can bring some challenges as well. And I think kind of in my personal experience, what I've been thinking a lot about is kind of the importance that students are considered in terms of kind of trauma-informed practice as well. So having that space for critically reflective supervision, and also, as Anne-Marie was just kind of saying, that importance of having students from a wide range of backgrounds. And I think a really positive thing is that there are so many different routes into the profession now, because they can attract different people that are at different stages in their life, and from my experience of working in what I consider a really good social work team is actually it's all about those relationships, firstly with the people that you're supporting, but also within the team and with the experiences that other people have. I guess then kind of moving on to the connections between theory and practice, I think that having that space to grow and to learn both personally and professionally is really important. I think it's the thing of you can't do social work as a crash course in a week. You need it. You need the time to grow and integrate what you're learning, both about the world and about yourself and how you react to that. And I think that one thing that's really positive is kind of it seems to be moving towards having more clarity about what those expectations of students kind of are. I think one area that I feel is positive is that we're having these critical conversations, for examples about things like the use of artificial intelligence. And actually, there's I think an idea that these are places to have conversations with students. It's not, necessarily that these are settled debates yet, but there's ongoing debates. And actually, as social workers, our job is to deal with ethical debates. And I think it's really important that we're having those kind of conversations early. Another thing that I thought was really interesting and something that I know that Kev has spoken about a lot is that importance of the having evidence-informed standards and thinking about, why is it that we expect a certain amount of placement days and not a higher amount or a lower amount, and also what is the quality of those days, and what kind of how do they take place. And I think for students, it's important that they feel able to reach out if they feel that they're not receiving high quality placement days, and that they kind of know firstly who to go to within the course, but then also where to raise that if they feel that that's not what they're getting. And finally, I guess that in terms of engaging students in shaping social work education and training, as I was saying, there's a broad variety of experiences and a diversity of opinion that comes from the different pathways into the profession. I think it's really important that we draw on that, from learn from what people have to say. I know that there's the work of like the regional engagement leads going around and meeting students, and I think that that's really valuable. I also think that having the conversations early in social work education about the role of kind of Social Work England, about regulation, although it might not apply, Social Work England necessarily might not apply to them in first year, it will apply to them eventually, but also the ethical things that we're considering apply the whole way through the course. So I think that that's really important. And I suppose that the kind of final thing, and my main takeaway and what I tend to in the meetings is tend to kind of get at, is that idea that social workers, social work students are it's a difficult time for a lot of people, and they're time poor. And I think what's positive is that we're having lots of conversations about how do we make these messages really clear and easy to engage with. And I suppose another thing to say as well is that, as Anne-Marie was saying, one thing that I've noticed is that Social Work England are really valuing the importance of co-production, and I think it's positive that we're seeing lots of other education providers providing, showing that as well, and that co-production is kind of early in the process of work, and that it's often, it's not a rubber stamp at the end of a piece of work. It's right from the inception of a piece of work, and it continues throughout that, so that you're really including people's voices. I think that that's everything that I had to say. So I think we're moving on to the Q&A session.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joe, but also thank you, Anne-Marie and Kev, for your contributions there. Absolutely, brilliant to hear from you all, and really pleased to hear some of the core themes that are so important to us at Social Work England around co-production, about that voice of lived experience, about student engagement, all coming through, I hope, quite organically as part of your kind of speeches today and presentations today. So huge thanks for that. As I mentioned, we're opening this up for a bit of a roadside chat now, a coffee table chat. So please do kind of put your Q&A into the chat function, and I'll be kind of moderating those and putting them to our panelists today. But really, really interested in the perspectives from all of our speakers today. And one of the ones I wanted to sort of pick up on was this sort of interesting that there are now these sort of different pathways into the profession. And one of the things that we've been interested in at Social Work England is what we've called the sort of Change the Script campaign, which is about kind of changing perceptions about the value of social work, and that being kind of part of a kind of ongoing sort of piece of work, which is sort of just looking at how, about how social work is perceived by social workers themselves, but also that being quite a key part of how you attract prospective students and so on to consider going into the profession. And I guess I was interested in panelists' perspectives here about how, what role can we play as Social Work England, but also in terms of education training providers, as well as students, and in terms of encouraging people to consider social work as a degree, as a career pathway, and how we might sort of address some of those kind of changing perspectives. And Joe, I might come back to you first on this, actually, as a relatively recent graduate, about how we can use tools like Change the Scripts, or what other things we might do to encourage people to consider social work as an option for their careers.
I don't have a perfect answer, but I guess that for me, I think, as I kind of said, a lot of people will come into social work with kind of lived experience, either of social work directly or of kind of the issues that affect, and I guess that I wouldn't have considered it had I not kind of personally heard of social workers, if that makes sense. And I guess that's an issue, because there are so many people that have got so much talent and so much ability that maybe don't have that direct contact or one separation removed contact with social work. And I suppose that it's, I think it is really positive, because one thing that I have personally noticed is from talking to people about being a social worker is that actually often people don't have much of an understanding of what social work is, and actually how broad the definition of social work is. And that's a difficult thing to change, because it's really difficult to encapsulate what social work is, in a broad sense, because it's kind of mostly about kind of promoting social justice and the ethical grounds of it. So yeah, I think that the Change the Script campaign is a really positive step, and I think it is about kind of not necessarily challenging directly, but kind of speaking positively about the work that we do, and about the change that people can make.
Brilliant. Kev or Anne-Marie, did you have any kind of reflections on how we might kind of encourage more students or others to consider social work as a career pathway?
Yeah, if that's all right, Natalie, I've got a couple of thoughts on this. I think it's really important, isn't it, to help sort of broader society understand what social work is, what social workers actually do. And as Joe had said, not necessarily everybody would know that. I think, there's some really important challenges and positive impact that social workers have with individuals and, of course, wider society. And because I'm an academic and I mark our Step Up students' practice assignments and their portfolios, I get to read about that work, but not everybody else does. I think for me, we know many social workers do feel really proud of their profession and the important work they do, but it's also important for them to know society is also aware of and supports and values their role and work. And I think this Change the Script campaign places a kind of focus on reframing some of those, negative stereotypes. And I'm part of a working group supporting the development of this guide. So actually what is quite important is to think about what are those negative perceptions, where do they exist, why do they exist, and only then can we actually work to support reframing that narrative. And there was a Change the Script Social Work Week session, and it talked about the importance of people having more information about education and training of social workers, and actually realising that they are professionally trained and academically educated. And that's such an important part of their work. And I think there's a lot more we can do to make people aware of that.
No, absolutely. And it's great to see. Thanks everybody for putting, various questions and things into the chat. I mean, there is some questions, Kev, just around the KSBs, which is great. And I think we've put the link to colleagues here so that they can sort of see the knowledge, skills and behaviour statement. And I think there's sort of an interest there, particularly around that kind of connection to racial equality and some of those themes that I think we saw coming through the KSBs, Kev. So it'd be good for you if you might reflect on that, and also just a broader quick reflection about how that sort of sits in the landscape, say with the PCF, etc., and the relationship between those. So Kev, just a couple of questions there on the KSBs, perhaps.
Yeah. Absolutely. So one of the key things is we wanted to make sure that inclusivity as a key value was within the knowledge, skills, and behaviour statements. So we know the language around anti-oppressive practice, anti-discriminatory practice, shifts and changes. But what we wanted to make sure is the core values of social work were very embedded in those values. We've got a diverse group within the ETAF. Obviously, the same kind of issues around representation. We can't have every single group that we'd like to, because otherwise the forum would be far too unmanageable. But we have listened to key stakeholders around diversity issues, and those were definitely embedded. In fact, some of them were ones which we had to spend probably some of the most time on, thinking around how we get the language right and how we ensure that. But I think the key thing is the KSBs are the benchmark that we mustn't fall below. Good standard, best practice. Hopefully we'll achieve and go beyond what the knowledge, skills, and statements say, but it's just to make sure we've got that baseline, that we don't fall below that, and that members of the public can expect a certain level of standard of education through that, really. There is a fundamental difference between the KSBs and the PCF. We can all choose whichever frameworks we want to kind of benchmark ourselves against, but the knowledge, skills, and behaviour statements of Social England will become part of regulation. So there won't be any option to decide whether or not an education provider is not going to meet those standards. I don't have any strong thoughts in terms of the PCF. I practiced all the way through using the PCF practice, and I'm sure many providers will continue to use that as a framework as well within education. But the knowledge, skills, and behaviour statements will be the formal benchmarks eventually as part of the education training advisory process that we're going. Sorry, the education training educational standards process that we will be going through. So I hope that answers your question. But like I said, we had a very diverse group looking at the KSBs, and I think we definitely got there. Thank you.
Brilliant. I mean, and there's also some interesting comments in the chat about sort of practice and the how you can focus more on the sort of quality of those placements rather than the number of days in terms of being required, and how you kind of get that balance. And I think it kind of relates to a sort of broader point about how do you sort of strike the right balance in terms of covering the theory and the competencies and the core areas that really need to be covered as part of that comprehensive degree, with that kind of more preparing for practice and the placement days and so on. And have we got that right at the moment? How does it sort of feel as it for education providers, for students? I wonder, Anne-Marie and then Jo, if you might reflect on that sort of balance between the sort of theory and the practice and the sort of quality of placements.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important, isn't it, that the placements are, high caliber, high quality. Practice educators are supported and equipped to do the job in the way that they want to do that. And I think, part of the element that HEIs take responsibility for is quality assuring those placements. So our students on the Step Up programme have just finished. They're, completing those quality assurance forms. We get to hear from them about how the placement has been for them. We get to hear from providers how the university has supported them in their roles. So there's a sense of, we can then sort of gather that data and look at it and think about, well, what do we need to do moving forward? Are there any areas that we need to enhance? How do we support practice educators? I mean, there's a key role for obviously the employers of practice educators to do that, but some of them are independent. So what's their, support network? Who do they go to? How are they supported? And there's peer networks, of course there are, but I think everybody takes responsibility for this, because I think, as I said, it's an academic discipline and a practice profession. So the two are intertwined. I think, those 200 days in practice feels, at the moment, a right balance. And you hear students say, gosh, that's gone really quickly. but I think there is, you know, probably more that we can think about, and engaging all of the people who, you know, for whom this is important, you know, for students, for newly qualified workers, employers, practice educators, and academics and other providers. You know, what, you know, should the balance be? Have we got everything right at the moment? Does feel really important to engage people in that conversation.
Absolutely, and I think it's just an ongoing conversation, isn't it, always to reflect whether it's the right balance. Joe, did you have any reflections on that? And perhaps I'll also just throw one other thing at you at the moment as well, just to think about. But there's quite a lot of discussion in the chat about students, which is absolutely right, because at the core of education and training is, of course, students, and we're very keen to ensure that students are at the sort of forefront of thinking about how education and training is shaped for social work. But there's some specific questions also, Joe, about students, or for all our panels really, about just the, you know, how students are, you know, it's quite tough being a student at the moment, isn't it? You know, financially, many, not just in social work, but across many courses are having to work at the same time, and there's issues with sort of bursaries and loans, etc. And, you know, just that sort of challenge of potentially having part-time work, trying to do a course, trying to do placements, and how is there more that could be done to sort of support students, or are there sort of examples that we know of at the moment where students are being kind of creatively supported that we could reflect on? So I guess it's a couple of questions for you there, Joe, around what, you know, how we can best support students in what we recognise as quite a challenging landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is that fundamental barrier of money, you know, and I think that a difficulty is that, you know, I think a lot of people are really motivated to, you know, there are people that I've talked to that have said like, oh, I'd love to do social work, but I just can't work it out financially. And I think that's such a shame. And I know that, you know, for example, so I trained on Frontline, and that meant that you had a guaranteed bursary, and you could kind of work out how much that was. And I don't have any dependents. I've not got any kids or anything. So I managed to get by okay. But I do know some of the people that were kind of, you know, working in evenings and weekends, and obviously when it's a very intense course, and like I was saying earlier, you know, for all social work courses, you're growing personally, and maybe you're having to deal with kind of vicarious trauma and revisiting some of your own experiences and things like that. That's a lot to deal with, and I think that for me, what I feel is important is, you know, people will understand that financially that things are very difficult right now. I think for students, it's about having that clarity. So it's about kind of understanding at what stage do I know if I've got a bursary or not, for example, if you're applying for a different course, or, you know, what are the expectations around me being able to work, you know, will I be able to work during placements? Will I be able to work during term time? And having those conversations, I think, early on. And I think for students, maybe part of that is reaching out to the providers early on and going, look, I want to make this work, but I'm not sure how. You know, is there any advice that you've got? Because other people will have been through that before. So yeah, I think that for me is kind of that sense of predictability. And, you know, I know that for some people, it was very unclear, for example, if they were in receipt of certain benefits, whether they would still be able to maintain those benefits when they got onto a course. And I don't know what the result of that was, but I know that must have caused a lot of uncertainty for them. And I guess I worry that could put some people off in terms of not having that stability. So yeah, I guess that for me is the main area that I think would be challenging for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and signposting to those things that are available is really quite key to helping students sort of navigate. But as you say, there are some challenges out there that we do understand. I want to sort of change tack just briefly, because, you know, we haven't kind of covered it much at the moment, but I wanted to sort of touch on the use of AI in social work education and training, and you know, what our panelists think about the sort of opportunities, but also some of the challenges that might be presented in this area. And Anne-Marie, perhaps I'll throw to you on this one as a starter for 10.
Yeah, no, that's completely fine. I think it's really interesting. So one of the things that I do in my role, I've got a college role leading on sort of quality assurance, and that also thinks about, you know, AI and academic integrity. But for social work students and social work professionals, we know this is a really important area for us to engage in. The kind of landscape for AI has changed so much over recent years. At the University of Birmingham, we've got two colleagues, Dr. Caroline Webb and Dr. Sam Kuna, who lead on this for us. So we've actually identified we need people to lead in this area. And they've identified a couple of sort of important things to think about. You know, there's a real interest from employers in the use of AI more broadly, but I think as well in the kind of social work, social care sector around, you know, how AI can support assessments and tools for specialist practice. It might reduce administration, for example. And, you know, AI and some of those analysis tools can help identify perhaps hidden patterns and trends in data that we otherwise might not see. Of course, a lot of the challenges are issues of consent, confidentiality, errors and potential bias. And their work focuses on educating our students in how to responsibly and ethically think about the use of AI, both in their studies and also as professional social workers. Sam actually has a web page and a YouTube channel that he allows people free access to, so he can support them, you know, so for educators and for social workers in the use of AI, both in education and in practice. And I know if you search for that, you will find that. I think there's something about, you know, how much information and equipping are we doing for colleagues working in this space and who are worried about this as a potential threat, as of course many people are.
Yeah, absolutely. Kev, I mean, I wonder if you've had any kind of thoughts so far in terms of ETAF about the sort of use of AI. And I know we're looking to do some preliminary research in this space, aren't we, in terms of AI in education and training. But I wonder, Kev, if you wanted to just share a few more perspectives from the ETAF point of view there on AI.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. I mean, I think it's clearly a very interesting time with AI, thinking about, you know, where it should be used and where it shouldn't. You know, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think, you know, we are learning around the kind of parameters of it. One of the things I'm really interested around AI usage is obviously, you know, how efficiently students can use it, maybe for doing literature searches, for instance, you know, to take the time, because we know there's literature out there. How do we search for it? You know, how do we get that? But when it comes to actual practice, one of the things I think we've got to kind of explore further is around, if we use AI, if we then have to use time to check that AI hasn't just made up, hasn't had some kind of hallucination and made up something that's completely false, you know, then how are we gaining efficiencies in that? And I always feel like it's like the adage of kind of like, we're being expected as academics to kind of be the driving instructor, teaching people how to drive when we quite don't know how to drive ourselves. And that's how it feels with AI. We're both on this kind of joint parallel journey with it. What I'd really like to be able to do is put into AI and say, did you write this assignment? And it would say, yes, I did. And I wrote it on this day and it told me those things. So it's like anything, really. I think there's real positive strengths that we can use for it. And those conversations are coming out in the ETAF in terms of how we envisaging that. But, you know, it's such a broad area that we're going to have to think about, primarily about how we build into standards public safety. You know, we've always had this issue around making sure that assessments are not a copy and paste exercise, and that things get put into assessments that, you know, really shouldn't be there by accident. You know, is there a danger with that with AI, really? So I think in summary, I would say I think there's some really positive things that are coming out in terms of looking at it. I don't think we're completely there yet. I'm loving assignments and module schemes that are talking about positive uses of AI. So you are expected to use AI in this assignment, but only in this way. Don't use it to write your assignment in its entirety, you know, those kind of schemes, really. So yeah, so I think, you know, we're going to be having more and more conversations about AI as we progress, really.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things you can't ignore it. You know, it's here. Exactly. And it's growing, and certainly we're keen to really kind of, you know, work with the sector and understanding how AI is used and what role we might play to be able to support and help students, providers, etc., kind of navigate some of these kind of complex things, as you say, Kev. So, you know, I'm sure it'll be one that ETAF and others are really focused on. Loads of questions in the chat, which is brilliant. Well done, everybody. Gold star to you all on this Friday afternoon. I wanted to pick up the role of practice education. You know, lots of chat and questions around practice education there, including, you know, some really honest reflections about feeling undervalued, overworked, and really wanting to sort of I think encouraging us as social workers to focus on practice education, which as I indicated we are doing, and we're very, very keen on. We will be doing some research in this area, but also looking at options to support practice education. You know, could that be an annotation of the register, for example? How many practice educators are there? What does the training landscape look like? But I mean, in terms of our speakers and picking up that depth of feeling within the chat, how can we better promote and celebrate the role of practice educators? And also just really, interested in panelists' thoughts on how we can sort of just really kind of recognise and highlight the importance of sharing expertise and also shepherding that sort of next generation of social workers, that vital role that practice education plays. So I wonder if any of our panelists want to jump in on that particular theme.
I'm happy to start. I mean, it's absolutely correct that practice educators, practice assessors need greater recognition than they're getting at the moment. Not only in terms of the qualifications, but the fact is that we are wholly reliant on practice educators and practice assessors for moving our students and progressing students effectively through our programs. You know, checking the baselines are met, that people are ready to be autonomous, independent in their practice as they go through their ASYE. So I absolutely concur. I think the key thing for us is ensuring that as an education training advisory forum, that we are capturing as many voices around practice education as we can to go into the standards. And I'm very pleased, recently we've been through a recruitment round and we have recruited more practice educators to the ETAF to get those voices and get those experiences in there. In terms of, whether the practice educators need to be a kind of, another regulated group, I don't think anyone wants to pay any more fees generally, not bringing that. But I think what we need to have is a framework where people who are practice educating feel valued, and I think that's really important in terms of making sure the student experience. And I'm sure maybe Joe's, might want to say a little bit about, in terms of how his experience with practice educator was, because my experience is some time ago, really. So, but yeah, definitely need to be more valued.
Yeah, I think reflecting on that as well. I mean, it's a thing of, I guess, from a having been a recent student, you don't necessarily kind of, when you're the student, consider what the experience of the practice educator is, if that makes sense. And I guess reflecting on it now, because obviously the students are going to be the subject of most of what, that's where most of the kind of aim will be going. Reflecting on it now, you go, as kind of Anne-Marie was saying earlier, you're teaching, you're also mentoring, you're also containing quite a lot of anxiety and supporting someone that doesn't have experience yet and might make mistakes and needs that, and yeah, so I think that, even just through this conversation, it's kind of opened my eyes a little bit more as to kind of how important it is that is considered, and that, practice educators are feeling more valued and more kind of, there's more understanding as well, clearly also among students, as to what that role is and as to how important that is, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Joe. I mean, I'm conscious that we're kind of running short on time, and I often like to sort of end these things with a sort of kind of positive framing about the sort of future for social work education and training, because, there's huge amounts in the chat around some of the complexities in the funding landscape and pressures on universities, etc., which unfortunately we don't have huge amounts of time to go into today. But I wanted to kind of ask the panelists just, for a closing kind of sentence or two about what you're most excited about in terms of the future of social work education and training. What gets you out of bed every morning? And Anne-Marie, I'm going to come to you first in terms of what you're most excited about.
I think what I'm most excited about is that, yes, the negative is we're in a really difficult financial climate for social work, for students, for society, the sector as a whole. And actually what that sometimes does is it leads to, innovations and creativity, because, there aren't the resources perhaps that there were, 30 years ago when I was a student. So I think some of those things, potentially could be really, really exciting, and those things will make a difference and have an impact on people's lives. We need to make space for that, though, I think.
Absolutely. Kev, what do you do? It gets you out of bed?
So for me, I'm continually humbled by the fact of why people want to come and train as social workers. I'm very passionate about social work. People come with their own experiences, their own drivers, and the diversity they bring to the programs that I've been involved in. I think are the main reason why I'm so passionate about education. Because we need to get it right, and we need to ensure that when people are ready for social work, they've had the best possible education they can, and it's the student experience that comes into that as well. And that's the positive bit I want to leave with, really.
Thank you. And Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo all of that. And I guess that, for me, the thing that I've really noticed throughout my time as an ASYE and as a student is that importance of people that have had lived experience of social work, and, hearing from people and learning from people. It's so meaningful. And I think it really sticks with students, and it maybe sticks more than some of the technical abilities that we learn. But that to me is the most important thing. And I'm really glad that there's loads of conversations about co-production and about the involvement of people with lived experience, and that is clearly something that is only going to grow.
Brilliant. And I guess, in terms of summarizing it up from Social Work England, we are hugely excited about the range of things that we outlined in terms of going forward, our review of education training standards, learning on those first 4 years, working collaboratively with the sector, and thinking about what else we might be able to do to streamline and support and make sure that we are sort of helping to create the sort of education ecosystem that really does encourage people into the profession, ensure that they are training in a really sort of dynamic and engaging way, and able to go and thrive in really rewarding careers, and join our register and be with us for a long time as part of a really rewarding social work career. So it is. Thank you all for your questions. Apologies we weren't able to cover them all in detail, but lots there to go at. A huge thanks to our panelists, to Kev, to Joe, to Anne-Marie, and also to the audience. Please, thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with us. We have got a review of the session in the chat, so please do let us know what you thought. Tell us all your perspectives, and please do join us again for future Social Work Week and future activities in the education training landscape where we're shaping these activities. Do engage, do reach out to us, do email ETAF, and do have a fabulous rest of the day and a great weekend. But huge thanks to you all.